The champagne glass slipped from my trembling fingers as my father announced my supposed promotion to vice president at Morrison Financial. 23 family members applauded while I sat frozen, knowing I had never worked there a single day in my life. My parents had been lying for months about my career, my salary, everything. As Aunt Margaret gushed about my success, I caught my mother's desperate eyes across the table. That was the moment I realized my entire family believed I was someone I was not, and my parents had orchestrated the biggest deception of our lives. Where are you watching from tonight? If family drama and shocking revelations get your heart racing, like mine did that Christmas evening, you are going to want to hit that like button and subscribe, because this story about uncovering my parents' web of lies will leave you questioning everything you think you know about family loyalty. Trust me, you will not see the ending coming. My name is Isabella Martinez, and up until that Christmas dinner, I thought I knew my parents. Growing up in suburban Denver, Mom and Dad always seemed like the picture of middle-class stability. Dad worked as a regional sales manager for a paper supply company, while Mom handled bookkeeping for a local dental practice. Nothing flashy, but honest work that kept us comfortable. The lie started 6 months earlier when I graduated from Colorado State University with a degree in communications. Like most recent graduates, I was struggling to find decent employment. I had been working part-time at a coffee shop while sending out dozens of applications weekly. The job market was brutal, and I was living back home feeling like a failure at 22. That is when my parents started telling people I had landed this incredible position at Morrison Financial, one of Denver's most prestigious investment firms. At first, I thought they were just being optimistic, maybe even trying to manifest something good for me. When neighbors asked about my job search, Mom would beam and say I was doing so well at Morrison Financial. When Dad's coworkers inquired, he would proudly mention his daughter, the financial analyst. I should have corrected them immediately, but their happiness seemed so genuine. For the first time in months, I saw my parents walking with pride instead of worry. The stress lines around my mother's eyes softened when she talked about my supposed success. My father stood a little taller when his buddies congratulated him on raising such an accomplished daughter. The deception snowballed quickly. My parents started providing increasingly elaborate details about my fake career. According to them, I was analyzing investment portfolios, attending high-level meetings, and impressing senior management with my insights. They described my office on the 15th floor with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Denver. They even mentioned my supposed mentor, a woman named Patricia Henderson, who was supposedly grooming me for partnership track. Meanwhile, I was still pulling espresso shots and wiping down cafe tables, earning barely enough to cover my student loan payments. The guilt was eating me alive, but every time I tried to confess, I would see the genuine joy in my parents' faces when they talked about their successful daughter. How could I shatter their happiness and admit that their investment in my education had not paid off the way we all hoped? The situation became more complicated when extended families started getting involved. My cousin David, who had always been competitive with me, seemed genuinely impressed for the first time in our lives. My grandmother, who had been worried about my generation's job prospects, would light up whenever someone mentioned my career achievements. Even my rebellious teenage sister Emma started treating me with newfound respect. Christmas dinner was supposed to be a small gathering, but somehow it turned into a celebration of my fake success. Relatives I had not seen in years showed up eager to congratulate the family's rising star. My parents had apparently been bragging about me for months, painting a picture of a young woman who had everything figured out. As I sat at that table listening to my father describe my promotion to vice president, I felt like I was drowning. The weight of the deception was crushing me, but I could not bring myself to humiliate my parents in front of everyone they cared about. So I smiled weakly and accepted congratulations for achievements that existed only in my parents' imagination. After the guests left, I cornered my parents in the kitchen. My hands were shaking as I demanded an explanation for the elaborate lies they had been telling. My mother broke down immediately, tears streaming down her face as she explained how desperate they had been to see me succeed. She admitted they had started small, just telling a few neighbors I was interviewing at good companies. But when people seemed so impressed and happy for our family, they kept embellishing the story. My father was more defensive. He insisted they were not hurting anyone, just giving me time to actually land a good job. He believed that if people thought I was already successful, it would boost my confidence and help me in real interviews. He genuinely thought the fake it till you make it approach would eventually become reality. What they confessed next left me speechless. Not only had they been lying about my career, but they had also been fabricating my salary information to relatives. They told everyone I was making $65,000 a year plus bonuses. Some family members had even asked to borrow money from me, assuming I was rolling in cash from my lucrative finance job. The most horrifying part was learning that my parents had been using my supposed success as leverage in their own social circles. My father had been bragging to his co-workers about his daughter's achievements, apparently hoping it would help his own career prospects. My mother had been accepted into an exclusive book club, partly because the other women were impressed by my fictional accomplishments. As I processed this information, I realized the web of lies extended far beyond what I had imagined. My parents had created an entire fictional version of my life, complete with fake salary figures, imaginary co-workers, and fabricated career milestones. They had built their social standing on a foundation of deception, and now I was trapped in the middle of it all. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, trying to figure out how to untangle this mess without destroying my family's reputation and relationships. I had no idea that the worst revelations were yet to come, or that my parents' lies about my career were just the beginning of a much larger deception that would shake our family to its core. The morning after Christmas, I could not shake the feeling that something was fundamentally wrong beyond just the career lies. My parents' reactions had been too panicked, too desperate for what should have been a simple case of overzealous parental bragging. The guilt in my mother's eyes suggested deeper secrets, and my father's defensive anger seemed disproportionate to the situation. I decided to do some investigating on my own. If my parents could fabricate an entire career for me, what else might they be lying about? I started by examining their financial situation more closely. Growing up, money had always been tight, but manageable. We lived in a modest 3-bedroom ranch house, drove reliable but older cars, and took occasional family vacations to nearby state parks. Nothing luxurious, but nothing that suggested serious financial problems either. However, as I paid closer attention to our current living situation, things started seeming off. Our house had undergone significant renovations in the past year. The kitchen had been completely remodeled with granite countertops and stainless steel appliances. The basement had been finished into a beautiful entertainment room, with a large television and leather furniture. My parents had also bought a brand new SUV just 6 months earlier, claiming my father had received a substantial bonus at work. When I asked my mother about these improvements, she became evasive. She mumbled something about my father's company doing well, and them finally being able to enjoy the fruits of their labor. But her answers felt rehearsed, like she was reciting a script, rather than sharing genuine information about their financial situation. My investigation took a more serious turn when I decided to visit Morrison Financial myself. I had never actually been to the building where I supposedly worked, which seemed absurd in retrospect. The gleaming office tower in downtown Denver was exactly as impressive as my parents had described. But when I approached the reception desk and asked about Isabella Martinez in the investment division, the security guard looked confused. After checking his computer system thoroughly, he confirmed what I already knew, but dreaded hearing no one named Isabella Martinez had ever worked at Morrison Financial. Not only was I not an employee, but there was no record of me ever applying for a position there. The company had never heard of me at all. Standing in that marble lobby, I felt a mixture of relief and terror. Relief because the charade was finally over, but terror because I realized my parents had been living in a complete fantasy world. They had not just exaggerated my job prospects or embellished minor details. They had invented an entire employment history out of thin air. That afternoon, I confronted my parents again, this time armed with concrete evidence of their deception. I told them about my visit to Morrison Financial and demanded a complete explanation of what was really going on. The conversation that followed would change everything I thought I knew about my family. My mother collapsed into a chair and began sobbing uncontrollably. Through her tears, she revealed that they had been struggling financially for over 2 years. My father's sales numbers had been declining steadily, and the company had cut his territory and commission structure. Meanwhile, my mother had lost her bookkeeping job when the dental practice switched to automated software that eliminated her position. For months, they had been living off credit cards and personal loans, desperately trying to maintain the appearance of middle-class stability. The house renovations had not been paid for with bonuses or savings. They had taken out a second mortgage and maxed out multiple credit cards to fund the improvements. The new SUV was leased with terms they could barely afford, but they felt they needed to project success to maintain their social standing. The fake career story had started as a way to buy time while they figured out their financial problems. If relatives thought I was successful and independent, they would not worry about helping our family or asking uncomfortable questions about money. My parents had convinced themselves that they were protecting everyone from unnecessary concern while they worked through their temporary difficulties. But the temporary difficulties had become permanent problems. My father had been passed over for promotion twice in the past year, and my mother had been unable to find steady employment despite months of searching. They were drowning in debt, behind on mortgage payments, and facing the very real possibility of bankruptcy. The most devastating revelation came when my father admitted they had been borrowing money from relatives under false pretenses. When my Uncle Robert had offered to invest in my supposed financial expertise, my parents had accepted $5,000 as a loan for my fictional investment portfolio. When my grandmother wanted to contribute to my fake retirement account, they had taken her $3,000 and used it to pay credit card bills. They had essentially been running a family-wide con game, using my fabricated success as collateral for loans they had no intention or ability to repay. My fictional career had become the foundation for a pyramid scheme, targeting our own relatives, and I was the unwitting face of their fraud. As the full scope of their deception became clear, I realized we were facing a crisis that went far beyond embarrassing lies about my employment. My parents had committed financial fraud against family members who trusted them. They had stolen money from my grandmother, my uncle, and probably others I did not even know about yet. The debt they had accumulated was staggering, and their house of cards was about to collapse spectacularly. That evening, I sat in my childhood bedroom, trying to process everything I had learned. My parents were not just desperate or misguided. They were criminals who had used my identity and reputation to defraud people I loved. The fake promotion announcement at Christmas dinner had been their final desperate attempt to maintain credibility before their entire scheme fell apart. I knew I had to do something to stop them before they hurt more family members, but I also felt an overwhelming sense of responsibility for the situation. Even though I had not actively participated in their fraud, my silence and compliance had enabled their deception to continue and escalate. I was trapped between loyalty to my parents and obligation to the relatives they had victimized. The next morning, I made a decision that would set everything in motion. I was going to gather evidence of their financial crimes and find a way to expose the truth before they could hurt anyone else. I had no idea that my amateur investigation would uncover secrets that made their current deception look like child's play. My investigation into my parents' financial crimes led me down a rabbit hole that I never could have imagined. What started as concerns about some family loans quickly revealed a sophisticated operation that had been running for years. I was about to discover that my fake career was just the most recent chapter in a long history of deception and fraud. I began by gathering concrete evidence of their financial situation. While my parents were at work, I searched through their home office looking for loan documents, bank statements, and credit card bills. What I found was worse than I had feared. They had not just taken money from Uncle Robert and my grandmother. They had been systematically borrowing from family members, friends, and coworkers for over 3 years. The paperwork told a devastating story. My parents had borrowed $15,000 from my Aunt Sarah to supposedly help with my college expenses, claiming they were temporarily short on cash, but expecting a large tax refund. They had taken $8,000 from family friends, the Johnsons, telling them they needed bridge financing for a business opportunity that never existed. They had even borrowed money from my father's elderly co-workers, spinning tales about investment opportunities and family emergencies. Most shocking was a folder labeled Investment Club that contained documentation for what appeared to be a Ponzi scheme my parents had been operating through their church. They had convinced fellow congregation members to pool their money for a group investment strategy, supposedly managed by their successful daughter, who worked in finance. Over 18 months, they had collected almost $40,000 from trusting church members who believed they were participating in a legitimate investment opportunity. The church investment scheme was particularly elaborate and heartless. My parents had created fake quarterly reports showing steady returns on investments that never existed. They had used new investors' money to pay fake dividends to earlier participants, creating the illusion of success, while pocketing most of the funds for their personal expenses. The most recent report, dated just 2 weeks before Christmas, promised investors that my promotion to vice president would lead to even better returns in the coming year. As I dug deeper into their financial records, I discovered that their debt problems were far more severe than they had admitted. They owed over $120,000 across multiple credit cards, personal loans, and private debt to family and friends. Their house was 3 months behind on mortgage payments, and they had received foreclosure warnings that they had hidden from me and my sister. But the financial fraud was just the beginning. In a box tucked behind old tax returns, I found evidence that my parents had been forging documents for years. They had created fake employment verification letters when applying for loans, fabricated income statements to qualify for credit cards, and even forged my signature on several occasions to open accounts in my name without my knowledge. The discovery that shattered me completely was finding 3 credit cards that had been opened using my Social Security number and personal information. My parents had been using my identity to accumulate additional debt, charging over $12,000 on cards I never knew existed. They had destroyed my credit score before I had even started building it all, while pretending to be proud of my fictional financial success. That afternoon, I called my sister Emma to share what I had discovered. At 19, Emma was attending community college while living at home, and I realized she might be the next victim of our parents' schemes. When I explained the situation, Emma initially refused to believe me. She insisted that our parents might be struggling financially, but they would never deliberately defraud family members or steal my identity. However, Emma's skepticism evaporated when I showed her the evidence. The fake investment reports with my name on them, the forged signatures, the credit cards opened in my name. It was all undeniable proof that our parents had been living double lives for years. Emma broke down crying as she realized that her respect for our parents' integrity had been based on elaborate lies. More importantly, Emma revealed that our parents had been asking her suspicious questions about her own financial aid for college. They had requested copies of her FAFSA forms and asked detailed questions about her student loan process. I realized they were probably planning to involve her in their next round of fraud, possibly using her student status to apply for loans or create new investment schemes. Together, Emma and I decided we needed to protect ourselves and gather more evidence before confronting our parents again. We drove to the bank where they maintained their primary accounts, hoping to get more information about their financial situation. I was not prepared for what happened when we met with the branch manager. The manager, Mrs. Patricia Henderson, recognized my name immediately when I introduced myself. My blood ran cold as I realized she was the woman my parents had described as my fictional mentor at Morrison Financial. But Mrs. Henderson was not a finance executive. She was a bank manager who had been dealing with my parents' deteriorating financial situation for months. Mrs. Henderson explained that my parents had been using my supposed success at Morrison Financial as justification for increasingly desperate loan applications. They had told her that their daughter was about to receive a large bonus that would allow them to consolidate their debts. Just last week, they had applied for another personal loan, claiming that my promotion would guarantee their ability to repay. Even more shocking, Mrs. Henderson revealed that my parents had brought her fake pay stubs with my name on them, supposedly proving my income at Morrison Financial. They had forged employment documents to support their loan applications, creating an elaborate paper trail for my fictional career. The bank had actually approved several loans based on these fraudulent documents. Mrs. Henderson also confirmed my worst fears about the foreclosure proceedings. My parents had exactly 30 days to bring their mortgage payments current or face eviction from our childhood home. They owed over $8,000 in missed payments plus penalties, money they clearly did not have and could not borrow given their maxed-out credit situation. As Emma and I sat in that bank office processing the magnitude of our parents' deception, Mrs. Henderson offered to help us understand our options. She explained that we could potentially file fraud reports to protect our own credit and legal standing, but doing so would likely result in criminal charges against our parents. The evidence of forgery, identity theft, and loan fraud was overwhelming and undeniable. Walking out of the bank, Emma and I felt like we were living in a nightmare. Our parents were not just financially irresponsible or overly optimistic about my career prospects. They were career criminals who had been systematically defrauding everyone who trusted them, including their own children. The loving, supportive family environment I thought I had grown up in was revealed to be a carefully constructed facade hiding years of criminal behavior. That evening, we made a pact to support each other through whatever came next. We agreed that we could not allow our parents to continue hurting innocent people, even if exposing them meant destroying our family. We also realized that we needed to warn the other victims before our parents' scheme collapsed entirely and everyone lost their money. But first, we had to figure out how to approach the most difficult conversation of our lives. We needed to confront our parents with undeniable evidence of their crimes and demand that they make things right before we involved law enforcement. We had no idea whether they would come clean and try to fix the damage, or if they would double down on their deception and force us to choose between family loyalty and moral responsibility. The next morning would bring the confrontation that would determine our family's future, and I was terrified that nothing would ever be the same again. The next morning, Emma and I sat our parents down at the kitchen table, where just days earlier they had served Christmas dinner to unsuspecting relatives. The irony was not lost on me that we were about to shatter the same illusion of family harmony they had worked so hard to maintain during the holidays. I spread the evidence across the table like a prosecutor presenting a case. Bank statements showing the church investment scheme forged employment documents with my name credit card applications, using my social security number, and loan agreements with family members based on lies about my career. The paper trail of their deception covered every inch of the wooden surface where we had shared countless family meals. My mother took one look at the documents and immediately began hyperventilating. She gripped the edge of the table as her breathing became rapid and shallow, her face turning pale as she realized the scope of what we had uncovered. My father, however, remained eerily calm, studying each piece of evidence with the detached interest of someone reviewing a business proposal, rather than confronting proof of his own criminal behavior. When I finished laying out everything we had discovered, the silence in the kitchen was deafening. For several minutes, nobody spoke. My parents stared at the evidence while Emma and I watched their faces, searching for any sign of remorse or acknowledgement of the pain they had caused. Finally, my father broke the silence with words that chilled me to the bone. Instead of apologizing or expressing shame, he looked directly at me and said that everything they had done was for our family's benefit. He insisted that the lies about my career were meant to boost my confidence and help me succeed. The borrowed money was temporary, and he had every intention of paying everyone back once his sales improved or I landed a real job in finance. My mother, still struggling to breathe normally, tried to support his rationalization. Through tears, she explained that they had never intended to hurt anyone. The church investment club was supposed to be a legitimate opportunity, but they had hit some temporary setbacks that prevented them from making the promised returns. She claimed they were on the verge of turning everything around. What happened next revealed the true depth of their delusion and manipulation. When I confronted them about the credit cards opened in my name, my father actually suggested that I should be grateful for the credit history they had helped me establish. He pointed out that many young people struggle to get approved for credit cards, and they had solved that problem for me. The fact that they had destroyed my credit score with missed payments and over-limit fees was apparently just a minor oversight. Even more disturbing was their reaction to learning that Emma and I had spoken with Mrs. Henderson at the bank. Instead of being ashamed that their lies had been exposed, they became angry with us for going behind their backs. My mother accused us of betraying the family by sharing private financial information with outsiders. My father demanded to know why we could not have come to them directly instead of making them look bad to the bank manager. Their complete inability to accept responsibility or show genuine remorse made me realize that Emma and I were dealing with people who had lost touch with reality. They had been living in their fantasy world for so long that they genuinely believed their own lies. In their minds, they were not criminals or fraudsters. They were loving parents who had made some questionable decisions while trying to provide for their family. The conversation took a darker turn when I demanded that they immediately contact everyone they had borrowed money from and confess the truth. I insisted that they needed to come clean about the church investment scheme, return whatever money they could, and work out payment plans for the rest. I also demanded that they close the credit cards opened in my name and take responsibility for the debt they had accumulated. My father's response was swift and brutal. He told me that if I forced him to confess to the church members, he would make sure everyone knew that I had been aware of the lies about my career for months and had done nothing to stop them. He threatened to tell our relatives that I had been complicit in the deception, making me an equally guilty party in their eyes. My mother supported his threat with emotional manipulation that cut even deeper. She cried that exposing the truth would destroy not just their reputations, but the entire family. She painted a picture of my grandmother losing her life savings, Uncle Robert facing financial hardship, and the church members feeling betrayed by people they had trusted. She insisted that keeping quiet and finding another way to fix things would protect everyone from unnecessary pain. But Emma surprised everyone by standing up to their manipulation tactics. At 19, my sister showed more moral courage than I had demonstrated in months of enabling their deception. She told our parents that their threats and guilt trips would not work anymore. She made it clear that she would rather face temporary embarrassment than allow them to continue hurting innocent people. Emma's strength gave me the courage I needed to make an ultimatum. I told my parents they had exactly 24 hours to begin making things right. They needed to contact Mrs. Henderson and arrange a payment plan for their mortgage, confess to at least some family members about their financial problems, and begin the process of unwinding the church investment scheme. If they refused to take these steps, Emma and I would start making phone calls ourselves. My father's reaction to this ultimatum revealed the true extent of his desperation and moral bankruptcy. He told me that if I destroyed his reputation in the community, He would make sure I never worked in finance anywhere in Denver. He claimed to have connections throughout the industry, who would blacklist me if I caused problems for him. The irony that I had never actually wanted to work in finance was apparently lost on him. More disturbing was his threat to involve the police himself, claiming that Emma and I had stolen private financial documents when we gathered evidence of their crimes. He suggested that our investigation constituted breaking and entering, even though we had been living in the family home with full access to all areas. His willingness to potentially criminalize his own daughters to protect himself showed how far he had fallen from any recognizable standard of parental love or responsibility. That evening, as Emma and I processed everything that had happened, we realized that our parents were not going to voluntarily make things right. They were too invested in their deception and too terrified of the consequences to accept responsibility for their actions. If we wanted to protect the people they had victimized, we were going to have to take action ourselves, regardless of the personal cost. We spent that night calling some of the family members we knew had been affected by our parents' lies. The conversations were painful and embarrassing, but necessary. We started with Uncle Robert, who deserved to know that his $5,000 loan was never going to be repaid as promised. Then we called my grandmother, whose $3,000 had already been spent on credit card bills, rather than invested for my fictional retirement account. Each phone call felt like another nail in our family's coffin, but we knew that protecting our parents' reputation was less important than preventing them from hurting more people. The confrontation had failed to produce the confession and accountability we had hoped for. Now it was time for consequences they could not manipulate or escape. The 24-hour deadline I had given my parents came and went without any attempt on their part to make things right. Instead of taking responsibility for their actions, they doubled down on their deception and began what I can only describe as a scorched earth campaign against Emma and me. On the morning after our confrontation, I woke up to find that my parents had contacted several family members with a preemptive story designed to discredit anything Emma and I might say. They told relatives that I had been having emotional problems since graduating college, struggling with depression and unemployment to the point where I had become delusional about my own career prospects. According to their version of events, I had convinced myself that my job at Morrison Financial was fake and had begun making wild accusations about their finances. My mother called my grandmother in tears, explaining that I was having some kind of mental breakdown and making terrible accusations against my own parents. She painted a picture of a troubled young woman who could not handle the stress of adult responsibilities and was lashing out at the people who loved her most. My father took a similar approach with Uncle Robert, suggesting that I was embarrassed about my employment struggles and trying to blame my parents for my own failures. The manipulation was sophisticated and effective. Several family members called me directly expressing concern about my mental health and offering to help me through what they assumed was a difficult period. When I tried to explain the evidence Emma and I had gathered, some relatives interpreted my detailed knowledge of financial documents as proof that I was obsessing unhealthily over my parents' private business. However, my parents made a critical error in their defensive strategy. In their desperation to control the narrative, they forgot about Mrs. Henderson at the bank. When Uncle Robert decided to verify my claims by contacting Morrison Financial directly, he learned that I had never worked there. More importantly, when he called the bank to ask about my parents' financial situation, Mrs. Henderson confirmed many of the details I had shared with him. Mrs. Henderson's corroboration of my story created cracks in my parents' defensive narrative that quickly widened into complete collapse. Uncle Robert shared what he had learned with other family members who began asking their own questions and demanding their own answers. Within 48 hours of my failed ultimatum, the entire extended family knew that something was seriously wrong with my parents' version of events. The church investment scheme unraveled even more dramatically. One of the church members, Mrs. Dorothy Williams had been planning to invest additional money based on the most recent quarterly report my parents had provided. When she called Morrison Financial to inquire about increasing her investment through their successful parishioner, she learned that no one named Isabella Martinez had ever worked there. Mrs. Williams immediately contacted the church pastor, who called an emergency meeting of all the investment club participants. When my parents failed to show up for that meeting, the pastor contacted the police to report suspected financial fraud. Within hours, detectives were at our house with a search warrant looking for evidence of the investment scheme Emma and I had already documented. The police investigation moved swiftly once they saw the scope of the fraud my parents had committed. The forged employment documents, fake investment reports, and pattern of lying to obtain loans constituted multiple felonies that could result in years in prison. When detectives learned about the identity theft involving my Social Security number, they added federal charges that carried even more severe penalties. My parents' reaction to the police investigation was a mixture of panic and continued denial that was painful to witness. My mother collapsed completely, spending most days in bed, crying and refusing to eat. My father became increasingly agitated and paranoid, convinced that Emma and I had orchestrated some kind of conspiracy against him rather than simply exposing crimes he had actually committed. The most heartbreaking aspect of watching their world collapse was seeing how thoroughly they had deceived themselves, along with everyone else. Even when faced with criminal charges and overwhelming evidence, they continued to insist that their intentions had been good and their methods were justified. They genuinely seemed to believe that their love for our family somehow excused the fraud, forgery, and identity theft they had committed. The financial consequences were swift and devastating. The bank initiated foreclosure proceedings immediately after the police investigation began, giving our family 30 days to vacate the house where Emma and I had grown up. My parents' employers learned about the criminal charges and terminated them both, eliminating any possibility of earning money to pay restitution to their victims. Emma and I found ourselves in the surreal position of having to pack up our childhood home while our parents sat in their bedroom, alternately crying and raging about the injustice of their situation. We sorted through decades of family memories, trying to preserve important items while preparing for a future that none of us could have imagined just weeks earlier. The impact on our extended family was equally devastating. My grandmother, who had trusted my parents with her limited savings, faced the reality that her $3,000 was gone forever. Uncle Robert's financial situation became strained when he realized he would never recover the $5,000 he had loaned for my fictional career expenses. The church members who had invested in the fake investment scheme collectively lost almost $40,000 they could not afford to lose. Most painful was learning how my fake success story had affected other young people in our extended family. My cousin David had been struggling with his own career disappointments, feeling inadequate compared to my supposed achievements. When he learned that my career had been entirely fictional, he was angry not just about the deception, but about months of feeling inferior to someone who did not actually exist. The legal system moved quickly to protect other potential victims. The district attorney's office froze my parents' remaining assets and began the process of calculating restitution owed to the various people they had defrauded. The church filed a civil lawsuit to recover the investment funds, and several family members indicated they would pursue their own legal remedies. As Emma and I prepared to move out of our childhood home, we realized that our parents' crimes had destroyed more than just their own lives. They had shattered trust between family members, caused financial hardship for people who could not afford it, and created a legacy of suspicion that would affect family relationships for years to come. The most devastating realization was that none of this destruction had been necessary. If my parents had simply been honest about their financial struggles, family members would have offered help and support. If they had admitted their employment problems, friends and church members would have provided encouragement and assistance. Their decision to solve temporary problems with elaborate lies had created permanent damage that could never be fully repaired. Standing in my empty childhood bedroom on our last night in the house, I understood that my family, as I had known it, was over. The people I had called Mom and Dad were going to prison, and Emma and I were on our own to build new lives from the wreckage of their deception. 6 months after the collapse of my parents' elaborate deception, I found myself sitting in a courtroom watching them plead guilty to multiple felony charges. The woman who had once bragged about my fictional promotion to vice president was now wearing an orange jumpsuit and shackles, accepting a sentence of 3 years in state prison for fraud, forgery, and identity theft. My father received a slightly longer sentence of 4 years due to his role as the primary architect of the investment scheme and his attempts to intimidate Emma and me during the investigation. As the judge read their sentences, I felt a complex mixture of relief, sadness, and something that might have been closure. Justice was finally being served, but it came at the cost of losing the parents I thought I had known my entire life. The months leading up to their sentencing had been a period of incredible growth and discovery for both Emma and me. We had been forced to become independent adults overnight, learning to navigate everything from apartment hunting to credit repair without any family support. The process was terrifying and exhausting, but it also revealed strengths and capabilities we never knew we possessed. Emma proved to be remarkably resilient in the face of our family's destruction. She transferred to a 4-year university on scholarship, pursuing a degree in social work with a focus on financial fraud prevention. Her experience with our parents' deception had given her a unique perspective on how families can be torn apart by lies and financial desperation. She wanted to use that knowledge to help other families avoid the same devastating consequences. My own journey toward rebuilding was more complicated. The identity theft my parents had committed left me with severely damaged credit and thousands of dollars in fraudulent debt. I spent months working with credit agencies and fraud departments to clean up the mess they had made of my financial reputation. The process was humiliating and frustrating, but it taught me more about personal finance than any college course ever could have. More importantly, I had to figure out what I actually wanted to do with my life now that I was free from the pressure of living up to a fictional career. For months, I had been so focused on maintaining my parents' lie about working in finance that I had never seriously considered what type of work would actually make me happy and fulfilled. After much reflection and some career counseling, I discovered that I was genuinely interested in helping people who had been victims of financial fraud. My experience with my parents' crimes had given me insights into how these schemes operate and how devastating they can be for the people who get caught up in them. I decided to pursue additional education in forensic accounting and fraud investigation. The work was challenging but incredibly rewarding. My first case involved helping an elderly couple who had been scammed by fake investment advisors, much like the church members my parents had victimized. Being able to use my painful personal experience to help other victims find justice felt like I was finally turning something terrible into something meaningful. Emma and I also worked hard to repair relationships with family members who had been hurt by our parents' deception. We organized a family meeting 6 months after the arrests to provide updates on the restitution process and to address some of the anger and confusion that still lingered in our extended family. The meeting was emotionally difficult but ultimately healing. Uncle Robert expressed his gratitude that Emma and I had found the courage to expose the truth, even when it meant destroying our own family structure. My grandmother, despite losing her savings, told us she was proud of how we had handled an impossible situation with integrity and strength. Several family members apologized for initially believing my parents' claims about my supposed mental breakdown. They admitted that the manipulation had been sophisticated and convincing, designed to exploit their love and concern for our family. The fact that they had been deceived by people they trusted made them more understanding of how Emma and I had been trapped in the same web of lies for so long. The church community's response was equally supportive once they understood the full scope of what had happened. Pastor Williams organized a support group for the investment club members who had lost money, focusing on healing and forgiveness rather than anger and blame. Several church members went out of their way to tell Emma and me that they did not hold us responsible for our parents' crimes. Mrs. Dorothy Williams, the church member whose investigation had helped expose the investment fraud, became an unexpected mentor and friend. She had lost more money than anyone else in the scheme, but she chose to focus on helping other potential fraud victims rather than dwelling on her financial losses. Her grace and resilience inspired both Emma and me to approach our own healing process with similar strength and purpose. The restitution process provided some financial recovery for the victims, though not complete compensation for their losses. The sale of my parents' house and assets generated enough money to return about 60% of what had been stolen from family members and church investors. While not ideal, it was more than many fraud victims ever recover. Perhaps the most surprising development was the relationship Emma and I built with Mrs. Henderson from the bank. She had been so impressed with our maturity and integrity during the investigation that she offered me a part-time job while I completed my additional education. Working at the bank gave me practical experience with financial systems and fraud detection that complemented my academic studies perfectly. Mrs. Henderson became something of a surrogate parent figure for both Emma and me. She provided guidance and support during our most difficult moments, celebrating our successes and helping us navigate challenges with wisdom and patience. Her belief in our potential helped us rebuild confidence that had been shattered by our parents' betrayal. 2 years after that devastating Christmas dinner, Emma and I have created a new definition of family based on trust, honesty, and mutual support rather than biological relationships. Our chosen family includes Mrs. Henderson, Pastor Williams, several church members who became close friends, and Uncle Robert, who remained steadfast in his support despite his financial losses. We still exchange letters with our parents in prison, though the relationship remains strained and complicated. They have both undergone counseling and claim to understand the damage they caused, but their letters still contain subtle attempts to justify their actions or minimize their responsibility. Forgiveness may be possible someday, but rebuilding trust will require much more than apologies and explanations. Looking back on this experience, I realize that discovering my parents' lies was actually the beginning of discovering my authentic self. For the first time in my life, I am pursuing goals and relationships based on genuine interests and values, rather than trying to live up to someone else's expectations or maintain someone else's deception. The fake career my parents invented for me never brought any real satisfaction or success. But the real career I have built from the ashes of their fraud has given me purpose, fulfillment, and the knowledge that I am helping other people avoid the same devastating betrayal that nearly destroyed my family. Have you ever discovered that people you trusted completely were living double lives? What would you do if you found out your own family was running a con game that hurt innocent people? I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below about family loyalty versus moral responsibility, and whether you think forgiveness is always possible when trust has been completely shattered. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more true stories about family drama, justice, and redemption. Share this video with anyone who might be dealing with their own family betrayal, because sometimes we all need to know that we can survive even the most devastating revelations and build something better from the ruins. Thank you for watching, and remember that sometimes the most painful truths can lead to the most authentic and fulfilling life.